All right, so in this video, we're gonna go over concepts of positioning with CSS. Mostly, we'll be talking about how web pages are constructed. And there are really a lot of different ways to go about this because these things are changing really fast. So I'm just gonna talk about methods that most of the frameworks use. So one thing about HTML is that HTML by itself is a pretty boring and ugly looking thing. So if you look at this is just plain HTML. This is pretty much what I get. Now, any web page without any CSS would look pretty similar and ugly like that. So for example, this page. So if I just turn off all the CSS for this page, so let me do that really quickly here, disable all styles. That will now look the way this web page would look like with plain HTML. So as you can see, everything just sits on top of each other and everything looks pretty boring and ugly. So if you want anything to look better or position things differently to go left, right, and things like this, you will have to start using CSS to be able to accomplish that. That positioning, however, will work if you do your HTML correctly. So even though CSS is the one that's doing all the positioning, if you don't do the HTML part right, there will be no way to make the CSS do it in the correct way. So for example, for a web page like this that has like a sidebar on the left, has a little bit of, header area on top, has this content area on the right side, as you can see, how would you go about doing something like this? So the main thing is to go with the structure of the page. And the structure of the page is basically a bunch of invisible boxes. So to try to illustrate this, let me actually take a little screenshot here. That's good. That should be good enough for us to do what we need to do. I'm going to just make a copy of this, go back and paste it. So for the most part, what we need to think about is that there's going to be a lot of invisible boxes in here. So for example, the way you would have done this, you could just imagine, well, it seems like we have the header area here, right? That's like a box like this. Then we have another area here, which is going to be our sidebar area here on this side, which I'm just going to change to a different color, I guess. And then finally, we have this main content area that kind of goes in here. So overall, our page has like this sort of structure. Now, in HTML, the structure you would do for this would be a little different because in HTML, you can't just put boxes side by side like this out of nowhere. So what you have to do mostly is to kind of think about of this breakdown of rows and columns in your page. So the way I could do that, I could just say this header area is the first row, and that would probably span all the way from the left to the right of the page, 100% of the size. We could then do another box here and do, okay, so now we have another rectangle that goes across this entire area right there. And we're going to do some background color for this as well. So now I have two rectangles. So for the first part, I did the rows. Now, once you got the rows going, actually, let me make this second one transparent. So now I have the two rows broken down. Now I'm going to go inside of those rows and break them down into columns. Now in this case, like for the first row like this, I couldn't really break it down into columns because things are getting on the way. See, we have this background and stuff like that. So there's really no way to break this down into columns. Pretty much we're stuck. Now for the second one, which is the second row, we could actually draw two boxes inside of this without cutting through anything in the middle. So I could just say, okay, so there seems to be like one box that could go like this inside of that box. And this box pretty much going to go all the way until that left side corner. But just for this illustration, I'm just going to keep it a little further from this. And then we would have another box that goes on this side, which would be right next to the other box. But again, just for this illustration, I'm just going to keep some distance so I can show you all the different boxes. So basically what I'm ending up with is that I have these two boxes that are going as rows. And inside of that second box, I have this 2 columns breakdown. And then you can take each one of those and then also break it down into new boxes inside of that. So for example, inside of this box, let me make it transparent again. I could say, okay, so in this box, well, could we break it down into columns? Well, not really. So it's going to sit on a way of all the stuff, so that wouldn't work out very well. But I could take this inner box and break it down into multiple other boxes that go this way. And there's really no rule exactly where the box should end after the first one or the second one. And if you had like 3 people designing the page, probably they would do it 3 different ways. But mostly, see, now I can take this new 3 boxes, whatever boxes I have, and then I can go inside of that box again and then break it down into columns. Now I could say inside of this box, now I have 1, 2, 3 columns so that I can have these 3 boxes side by side. So that's kind of the idea of these boxes. And these boxes are not really visible boxes we can see on a page. They are invisible. However, they exist. So all of these invisible boxes are those div elements. Now, in addition to divs, however, there are all of these different types of elements. Actually, for this, let me just open a new HTML. I'm going to call it layout.html. And I'm just going to do my main HTML structure here. So to spend less time on this, I'm just going to use some shortcuts. So I'm going to do exclamation sign and hit tab. That will generate the main HTML body and head. And I'm going to go inside of body. And this is pretty much where we're going to have to build our boxes and all this stuff to create our layout. The elements that you should be able to use, so let me add a little comment here, are div. So in addition to div, there's a bunch of, as I said, new type of elements you could use. So for example, section, article, nav, main, aside, header, footer. And all of these boxes used to be just divs. So you would just do div, open, close. So now instead of that div, I could just use, for example, a section. So all of these are containers. And it's basically going to serve as one of those invisible boxes. So if I wanted to reconstruct something that has this structure, that I have this header, that I have this sidebar on the left, and this area, let me just for now get rid of this breakdown in the middle, something like this. I have this, see, header on top, then I have left and right sidebars. To make sure I can position those left and right, I have to put them inside of a row as well. So something like this would look, in my code, I would have the section. That section would serve as this first top box. And then I would do another section here that would go around this entire thing. So that thing is going to sit below this one. So we'll do, again, this could be section or it could be really any one of these things on top. So now I have 2 sections, one above the other. Inside of this second section, now I want to have like sidebar area and this area on the right? So now I have 2 other things I'm going to have to position here inside of that row, those 2 columns. So I could do something like a side, for example, for that sidebar, and I could do something like main for what I'm going to think as my main area. So something like this. And again, like I said, I could just replace all of these with div. And it would work pretty much the same way. So I'm going to undo all of this. So these are all going to be those invisible boxes. So let me just quickly show you those invisible boxes on a real case scenario. So right now here, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna just add some background colors to this area so you can kind of see those invisible boxes. So I'm just gonna go to the inspector. Let me try to find what they did here. I should have probably prepared a little better for this, but yeah, what difference does it make? So there's gonna be this, see, there's this div that goes around the whole thing. I'm gonna go here and add some background color so you can see that. I'm gonna make it yellow. Okay, so that's a box. See, that sits across here. So that's the row box right now. And that row box, if I keep scrolling down, that will probably keep going for a while. Yep, pretty much goes all the way down until this footer area. So basically we have on top, we have this header stuff. Then we have that second row, which is that yellow box. And then the next box is going to be this footer area all the way down here. Let's go inside of that yellow box now and try to figure out where are the column breakdowns inside of that box. I'm going to open that. And in that div, apparently they just made another one. Apparently there's this newsletter box, whatever it is. They broke it down into probably multiple rows. Yeah, that's this thing. But we're going to skip that one because we don't care about it. We mostly want to just look at the column structure at this point. So right now in here, if I look, there it is. So now we have, see, this two divs. One is this div that is sitting on one side. The other one is this div that's sitting on this other side. So if I do some background colors for this, you should be able to see that box structure that I'm talking about. So there we go. See, we have this row, which is the yellow box. Then inside of that yellow box, we have this orange, one column, and then we have this other invisible green box. So you can't really see them because we don't apply background colors to these boxes because nobody wants to look at this, but they still exist and they basically apply the structure for this page. So I'm going to reload this. You're going to see this happening in all type of frameworks. And usually what frameworks do, they do this row and column naming convention. So what they do, they add a class for each one that's going to be a row as a row class. So for us, this is one of the row boxes, this section. And this other section on top is also one of our row boxes. And then in here, we have these two columns. So here we can do a class and add a class of some columns. So I can say call left. And then I can go here and say equals. Actually, I have to do class first. Call right. Actually, instead of right and left, let's do some sizing. So if you think about this, I want like this area to be whatever size this is going to be. So let's think about this like 25% of the page. And I can just say 25. And this other one is going to be the other 75% of the page. So we'll just say 75. These classes by themselves, they don't do anything unless you assign some CSS rules to those classes that we've just assigned. So let's just go here and add a paragraph in each one of these and do some text. We'll say sidebar and we'll say main area. And this one will be header area on top, which should probably be inside of a paragraph as well. Now, if I just open this page, nothing is going to be on the side of the other thing. What's going to happen instead, let's go change this to layout file, reload this, zoom in a little bit so you can see basically everything is showing up on top of one another. Even though we make those boxes and we call them row and column, they don't really do anything until we style them. So to do some styling, we're going to do some CSS on this page. So we can do CSS directly inside of the page by using style container. And that will usually go in our head section. And anything we write in our style container is going to be CSS. So I want to style these classes that I've created, this row, column 25, and this other column 75. So to style the row, we have to do the class. And the way you indicate that you're targeting a class using a dot in CSS. So by doing dot row, I'm saying I'm trying to look for a class row, because you could also have, for example, an ID row or something else row, right? So if we want to target the class row, that would be dot row in CSS. And then I'm going to make two more class containers here. You know, rules containers, whatever you want to call this. And just to match the other two, so we have call 25 and call dash 75. I think that covers all of these that I just made here. So I just matched these names and I put a dot in front of them because that's the indication of the class. In CSS, we have what we call a selector. So this part is the selector. And what selector does, it pretty much will just search the page and try to find things that match this. So when it goes through this, it's going to look for class row. And what it's going to do, it's going to find, hey, this element has the class row and this element has the class row. Once it finds those things, then it's going to apply some rules to them. So those rules are going to be properties and values that are within the square brackets. So for my rows, I'm going to add some border so we can actually see them. That's the property, and the value follows the colon. So I'm going to do 1 pixel solid. That means a straight solid line. And then the color of the border will do black. So that will just draw some border for us so we can actually see it. I'm actually going to add border for the other ones as well, for these other two. And then I'm going to also add a background color to all of these so we can actually see what's going on. So I'm going to do background color for this first one. So background dash color. I'm going to do light blue for this first one. And I'll have to just repeat this for all of these. Save this. So now because I applied these rules to this classes, is going to search and find elements with these classes and it's going to apply those rules to them. So if I save this and go back and reload my page, you'll see now that I have each one of those having a background color and having some sort of border. Now, if you remember, row was applying to this section and this section. So both of them have row class. So both of them should have a border and they should be light blue. But when I look here, I can only see light blue for this header area and I can't really see that second one. So what's really happening? It's there, but we can't see it because the sidebar and main area are right on top of that box and we can't really see the box itself. So for us to see that box, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add some padding to my rows to push the content in the row in so we can actually see the boxes that are within the row. So I'm going to go here and add some padding, and padding will push everything inside of the box in. 20 pixel padding. Save this, go back and reload. See, it's pushing the content in by 20 pixels from all sides of the box. And we can also see now, see there's 20 pixel this way, 20 this way. Now we can actually see, this is the first section row. This is the second section row, this blue box. And inside of this blue box, we have this two, one green, one red box, but they're not side by side again, because that's what HTML does. So how do we make these things go side by side? So what we do, we take their parent box. So right now the parent for this green and main area box, these two boxes, is this blue box below, this row. And what we do, we apply display flex property to that parent container. So if I go and add to that row display colon flex. So display is the property, flex is the value for that property. So by default, that section or div would be block, similar to display block like this, but we're changing it to display flex by doing this. So if I do that, I'm saying whatever you find with this class row is gonna be a row that's gonna have columns in it. So right now, if I go back, save this, and just reload this page, by saying this is a row, this section, and this is a row, this section, any child element we put, and any direct child element, more specifically, we put inside of it, is gonna become a column of that row. See, now we have two columns. So basically, any parent element in here that you take and assign display flex to it, it's going to make all the direct childs, which are these two in this case, direct childs, columns inside of that row. Now to size those columns, which is this and this, you're going to assign some property values to these other classes. So one is this column 25%. So if I go here, for each one of those column boxes, you assign a property flex. And the flex, for now, I'm just going to do 1, so you can kind of see what's going on here. So I'll just do this for each one of those. So if I save this, go back and reload this thing. Now those two boxes are exactly equal sizes. So 1-to-1 relationship. So if I want to change that relationship, I can say this 75 one should be 2-to-1 relationship. So basically by doing this, I'm saying this one should be 2 times bigger than this one. So if I save this, I can go back and reload this. See, now this is going to be 2 times bigger than this first column on the left. And then if I just change it to 3, I'm going to say that needs to be now 3 times bigger than the one on the left. So, and it doesn't have to be an exact number. This could also be like 2.5. And these numbers don't really have to be 1 to 2.5. It's basically just the relationship between those numbers that makes any difference. So if I change this, for example, to 2 and this one to 5, that will result in having the same difference between those two. I basically just multiplied both by 2, which ends up being the same thing. So the same way, if you, instead of doing 1, 1, which ends up being both being the same size, if you did something like 5 and 5, that will end up being the same thing. So it's going to be just equal to boxes because 5 to 5, same relationship. You could also do 50-50 for you to think of this like a percentage. It's fine. It's still 1-to-1. It's still going to be half and half. We could also just say, okay, so this one is 25 and this one is 75. And this number, 75, is 3 times bigger than this 25. So that should just work out fine for us as well. So we'll have that 25% to 75% between these two. So flex method is probably the most commonly used method right now. There used to be things we have to do float left, float right, but things are changing rapidly. Now we're getting to this new thing that's called grid. But right now I'm concentrating on this because for most frameworks, this is currently what's in use. Now you could now take this inner box and break it down into its own like row column situation. Let's take a look at this case. So for example, in this area here on the right, see we have these 3 HTML introduction, HTML tutorials, HTML reference boxes side by side, which is sitting in this main content area here. So how could we do something like that? If I just go in my HTML and find that box, so that box is going to be this main area. So inside of this main area, just below this paragraph, I'm going to create, again, that structure. So I need a row with 3 columns in it. Let me just do that. So we'll do, I guess, a div. In this div, we'll do 3 columns in it. So 3 columns means 3 divs. So I just have to basically repeat this thing over and over again. Now, before I repeat it, let me actually put some content in there similar to this H3 and do HTML introduction. And then below that H3, we'll do a paragraph, learn HTML today, blah, blah. Anyway, so I'm just going to spit this up by just adding about 12 more words in here, some random stuff. Basically, heading and this paragraph inside of that div box, which we're thinking about this div box as our column. So I'm going to add a class to that div and say column dash, and it should be like 1/3. So I'll do 33 for this. It's just a name. It can be really anything. And then I'm just going to repeat this a couple of times here. So one. So basically what I did, this was our main box. We still have that paragraph. And below that paragraph, I made a div, which I'm going to think about as my row. So since we're thinking about it as our row, let's actually add, the class row to it as well. So now we're going to have this row with these 3 columns in it. And each column has some content inside of that column. So right now, if I save this, because this row class already exists, and we assigned to that row class that display flex, that should automatically turn all this direct child containers, this div, and this div, to columns. So if I go back and take a look at this, see, I have this HTML introduction things sitting side by side because they're pretty much columns right now. Let's actually go and assign some background colors to those column boxes so we can see what they look like. So this column 33 is the one we don't have as of right now. So I'll go and assign that in my CSS by also creating this here and do some sort of border and background color for this as well. So something like that, save that, go back and reload. So now you can see we have these 3 boxes. Let me zoom out a little bit. Now I'm gonna assign that same type of background, this grayish background as they have here, to more or less kind of try to match it. So let's go back and do background light gray. And again, I'm not trying to really recreate what they did, but I'm trying to give you more like a working example of something. The other thing I want to do right now, if you look at my boxes, first of all, I'm just going to go and add flex to those as well, just for good practice. Now, if you wanted these to be different size columns, then you would have to give them different class names, similar to how I did it here, this 2575 thing. But if I want them all to be the same size, then I'm just going to give them the same name. As a matter of fact, I could just simplify this and probably call it that, which would probably be a better idea than having that 33 thing. So something like this. So save it. I'm still going to get the same stuff. So for these, I'm also going to add some spacing. So if you remember, they have some space here in the middle of their boxes, right? Many different ways to approach this. You could do a padding and add another container inside of the box, which probably would be the way I would like that happen. But right now I'm just going to add a margin to just push these things away from one another. So if I go here and add a margin, I'm going to add margin right. And I'm going to say that margin should be something like 10px for 10 pixels. If I reload this, see, that's going to push some margin. Now you can see how the left area and the right area is not the same because now we have a margin on this right side as well. So we can fix that by making sure the last one doesn't have the margin. So we'll do column last child. This means that when you find that class COL element, if you find the last one in the list, do these rules that are coming right next to it. So I'm going to do margin 0 for that one. So let's go back and reload. Now you can see how the spacing is even on both sides. And finally, to have our text going away from this borders a little bit, we're going to add some padding to that column. To all the columns, we're going to add that. So padding, 5 pixel padding or something like that. You could also use different measurements, but I guess we'll talk about them at some point. And mainly you wouldn't keep all these other background colors. If I go back and remove all those backgrounds and borders, then we won't really be able to see all those other things. So I'm just going to remove this, this, and this. Save that, go back, reload, see these things will just show up left, right, wherever they're supposed to be. And we have these 3 boxes in the middle. So hopefully that gives you some idea how positioning is done in a lot of these websites, how you make something go left or right or something like that, why this structure is important. So when you build your HTML, you need to make sure you have the structures of rows and columns in the rows, and then you put different things inside of those columns. And when you work with different frameworks, so for example, if you did watch any of my web app videos, you may have seen me using Materialize CSS. And here, when you go to their structuring of grid system, and if I scroll down a little bit, you're going to find out that there is that same structure. See, there is the class row, and then we have all these columns that are going inside of it. So that will just create this row with, in this case, 12 columns. Definitely a lot more to learn about this. But for this one, this should be enough. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.